Already waited a few minutes, which is like our
All right.
usual 30 seconds, so go for it.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with the DPLA team. My name's John Bracken. I'm the executive director of DPLA. Really excited to be able to share a snapshot of what we're up to right now. I think as I've been talking to folks this last week, I think a lot of us are in this transition mode generally of where we're both excited about the world and where we're taking it and the progress that we made over the last year through the challenges that we all experienced together over the last year and a half. Also feeling inspired and an extra sense of urgency that the experience of living our lives virtually through digital, through the national reconciliation that prompted last summer, through social movements around reflecting anew on the national racial legacy and legacies of white supremacy in our work and in our institutions, that those realizations and learnings that we're coming together with, for those of us who work on the issue of ensuring access to digital knowledge and information, has become much more germane and pertinent and immediate and less abstract. And so from a DPLA perspective, we're beginning to, the projects you're going to hear about today is our efforts to begin to make that manifest of really understanding, reflecting the realities that many of us were aware of before, but extra aware of coming out of this last year, of the inequities when it comes to access to knowledge and information and the ways in which those inequities perpetuate legacies of repression, and the possibilities that digital and deep collaboration enables for liberation. So with that, I'm going to begin to hand over to my colleagues who are doing the work and doing the partnership, starting with Michael Della Bitta, who is our Director of Technology.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today. I'm going to briefly talk about some work we're trying to shape here at DPLA around the concept of algorithmic justice. And just to kind of frame the problem, what do we mean when we say algorithms? I think that there's a problem with this term in the sense that it turns some people's brains off. They think algorithms, that sounds like math, and that must be someone else's problem. We're trying to conceive of this as something where that's not true. We're thinking of this in terms of the search systems that libraries build and deploy on the internet widely and have been for decades. And we believe that those systems and the library practices around them that feed them are not impartial. They require our oversight to make sure that we're representing communities, whether they be communities that have been in the limelight for a long time or communities that have been underrepresented for decades or centuries, that we need to exercise oversight to make sure that those representations are proper and just. So in that sense, this isn't like a technical problem, and it's not a problem for mathematicians. It's a problem for all of us. We're all collectively responsible for trying to figure out how to build these systems in ways that are just for all communities. So just to put this in context, you can think of algorithms in the center of a techno-social construct that involves our collections and our metadatas, our users and user interfaces, our people and institutions, and our history and culture. And it's an antenna and an amplifier for how all these systems are working together and representing people. And if we aren't tuning that antenna, we are doing a disservice to the people we represent. So we've done some exercises recently to kind of try to shape this work. And here's an actual image from a virtual sticky board that we built around this work, just a quadrant of it, and talking about what our goals would be if we were going to be doing work in this area. And you can see here that we are trying to be transparent. We're trying to share our work broadly. We're trying to bring our online knowledge partners with us, whether they be part of the DPLA network or partners outside of our cultural heritage network. Very important that we include underrepresented communities at the ground floor, and that we raise awareness in the profession about the problem and potential solutions. And that we rely on local or community-specific expertise and expertise in general to develop tools or strategies that can be used by more than just us at DPLA. So next, I'm going to turn it over to myself to talk about our Wikipedia project. If you take a look at Wikipedia on the internet, you can see that their monthly traffic numbers have more commas in them than anybody else. Really, that's a traffic figure to be jealous of if you're any internet presence, let alone libraries. And I think it's an aspiration for all of us to have our materials be used and be used by more people and more effectively. And I think the Wikipedia community is one that we can look to as a model for how we should behave, but it's also a platform for us to participate in order to get our material used. So we were generously offered a grant from the Sloan Foundation to do work with the Wikipedia community, and in particular, one of their properties called the Wikimedia Commons, which is essentially the digital asset management system that underpins all the media that shows up on Wikipedia and in Wikipedia articles. And one of the things that was really important in doing this work was the uptake of right statements across our network. In particular, what this meant is that we can identify the material that's appropriate and legal to upload into Wikimedia Commons without violating Wikimedia Commons guidelines and without committing copy fraud. So you can see here that there's actually a facet now on our website where you can look in broad categories to find materials that have unlimited reuse or fair use or reuse, but no modification or reuse with conditions, right statements attached to them, which I think is a real boon for anybody trying to reuse this media. But in terms of this project, it made it possible for us to programmatically find the material that we could upload. And here you can see that we've worked with a number of partners to bring their material up to Wikimedia Commons, and that list is growing, and we're seeing more adoption and more involvement over time. And here you can see that we have hit 2.2 million records, and that continues to grow on a monthly basis. And it turns out that because of this program that we've done over the past, say, year and a half, we are now the biggest contributor on behalf of all our contributors to Wikimedia Commons across the entire planet. Oh, I'm sorry, this image doesn't seem to be showing up. If this slide were working, you would see an image that showed that we are now getting actually millions of hits on articles that feature our images, because people have done the work of trying to including these images in articles, which is the main way that they'll be seen. And we are seeing millions of hits because these images are now showing up in important articles like Memorial Day, May Day, President of the United States Navy, those sorts of things. So when we make these images available to the Wikimedia community, and also when we participate in that community by placing images in articles, we're able to see literally millions of views on these things, which is something that I think all of us aspire to. Oh, there it is. Darn it. Okay, in the future, we've received a grant from the Wikimedia Foundation to do some work on our synchronization pipeline. So we intend to build that out and make it so as metadata is updated over time, we can improve the metadata that shows up on Wikimedia Commons and make those images even more findable. There's an initiative at the Wikimedia Foundation to include structured data like RDF triples essentially on images, which means that they'll be even more findable through search interfaces and programmatically. So we're going to participate in that. We are hoping to offer, we already do offer some analytics to our partners around use and placement, but we're going to improve on that under the auspices of this grant. And we're going to participate in an experiment around, in a proposal to allow for citations to be attached to images when they're placed in articles. So instead of it just being an image, and the editor is responsible for coming up with the caption, it would be driven by the metadata in the image, and also would include information like the participating institution that brought us the image to Wikimedia Commons. Okay, that's it for me, and I'm going to hand it over to Michele Kimpton to talk about our ebooks program.
Great, thanks, Michael. And that was really good. I enjoyed that. Welcome, everyone. And I'm just going to give you a brief update on our ebooks work with DPLA. Next slide, please. And my name is Michele Kimpton. I'm the Director of Business Development and Senior Strategist here at DPLA. And for those of you that are not aware, we have been working in what I'll call the ebook space with public libraries over the last 4 years. And this is just an update on where we are for those of you that haven't been keeping track. So the goal of DPLA in working with publishers and providing ebooks to libraries is to really increase equitable access to ebooks and audiobooks in the digital space. And why this is important at this particular time is, as we're coming out of this pandemic, hopefully for the long run, there has been a 40% increase in demand for specifically ebooks and audiobooks from public libraries. And it was really apparent as many libraries had to shut their doors in the physical space that having a digital presence and particularly providing materials to patrons in digital form became an increasingly important part of their overall offering and strategy. And at DPLA, we want to ensure that what libraries have access to for their patrons is as diverse as possible, comes from multiple sources, not just one source, but multiple sources. So many different voices and communities can see themselves in those ebooks and audiobooks. And in order to increase the amount of ebooks and audiobooks that libraries can actually offer their patrons, we want to make sure that there's multiple models available in terms of how they would lend those books. So it's not just one model, there's multiple, and that fits multiple use cases. So if a book has high demand, you have lots of those ebooks available. If a book is, you just want to have it on the shelf permanently, there's a model that suits that use case. And so over the last 4 years, and in particular this last year, we spent a lot of time engaging with our community, our library stakeholders and library leaders to listen to what their needs are regarding ebooks and audiobooks, and are trying to move the field in a direction that's aligned with library goals. Next slide. So one of the ways that we've been doing that is we actually have a marketplace. It's called the DPLA Exchange. You can find it at www.exchange.dp.la. And at that site, you will see we have roughly 1 million titles. I think there's more like 800,000 now, but there'll be 1 million by the end of the summer. And when you browse the site, you'll see that you have lots of ebooks that, maybe a vendor like Overdrive has. But what's unique is that we also have titles that Overdrive doesn't have, because we include titles that are for free from the public domain. We include single titles under multiple lending models, and we are including new publishers that aren't available from other providers such as Amazon. So I think this news was heard by many. DPLA was effective and strategic in making a deal with Amazon to make their Amazon publications available to libraries. And their titles are starting to come to life this summer, and we should have the full suite of them, which is 10,000 by the fall. And also in this agreement, Amazon is making those titles available under multiple licensing models. So that was really nice to be able to craft that agreement with them. And start to see, libraries will immediately see some of the benefits of those new licensing models. Next slide, please. And on the topic of multiple licensing models, not only Amazon, but these are a few of the publishers we have those licensing models with. Abrams and Workman, Blackstone, and Amazon are the big ones, but also smaller publishers that really are interested in finding out ways that they could get more of their books into the hands of libraries, and libraries are interested in finding ways that they're not only delivering books under a single model, which doesn't make sense for matching all the use cases that they are interested in fulfilling with their patrons. Next slide, please. So what are some of those lending models? And there's actually more than the ones listed here, but I'll tell you about a few of these. So this 40 lends 10 at a time. Where this model came from was actually out of some research done by some of our friends at in Washington State that run a consortium. And one of the reasons that this model was developed is they were looking for a way that really mimics a physical book. So based on their analysis of how many lends a physical book gets before you replace it and what the cost of that book is and how many users might check it out at a time, we came up with this 40 lends 10 at a time model. And after 40 lends, that book, that license is complete. So it needs to be renewed. So that's really the kingpin of that model. The second model is really kind of experimental. So 5 lends, 1 at a time at a quarter of a price. So this would be for a book that maybe is from a new author, maybe has never circulated in your library, and you want to, create interest, but you don't want to make a huge investment. So you can get this type of license for those books and see how it does, and then you can change the model based on the circulation that you're seeing. Unlimited lends, 1 at a time, perpetual use. This model is effective, when you always want to make sure you have a virtual or copy of the book on your virtual shelves. So it only can lend out 1 at a time. So it's not really effective for when you have a bestseller and you need to lend out hundreds or maybe thousands of that book at a time. You don't want to buy 1,000 perpetual use ebooks. But as that bestseller, 2 or 3 years down the road, you might always want to have a copy or a couple copies of that book on your virtual shelf. And then the other 2 models are just, more variations, some that publishers like, some that libraries like. The last one is also one that we've been offering, which is this simultaneous use for a defined period of time. This we piloted with Bibliolabs, which has put together collections from various publishers and makes those bundles, those collections available simultaneously to any patron, no matter how many people want to check it out for a period of time, and there's a price associated with this. There have been several state libraries as well as public libraries that have put together what I call community reads programs, where they've negotiated around a single title or a bundle, but they can then use that and promote that throughout their community, their region, or their state. And that seems to be catching on as libraries are trying to create these relationships with patrons and their community in the digital space. Next slide, please. And this is actual snapshot of the DPLA exchange. And this is just, an example. This is a Blackstone audio title. They're giving 3 models on a single title. And this is what you'll find throughout the site. Next slide, please. The other way that we are working to get more books into the hands of libraries is creating what is called Open Bookshelf. We currently have 10,000 free books available to any library to download and offer to their patrons. What is an Open Bookshelf? They're all EPUBs, and you'll find textbooks from the Open Textbook Project. You'll find open access press publications from academic libraries. You'll find open access books that have that come from a variety of sources, that really cover the full spectrum and genre, as well as, you know, the public domain classics. So anybody that that goes to the exchange can find a tab. It's called Open Bookshelf, and those are all our freely available books for your patrons to read. Next slide, please. So that is some of our work that I'm highlighting today. If you want to find more about the DPLA Exchange, and if you are interested in becoming a buyer of the books in the marketplace, I highly encourage you to join the DPLA Exchange. It's free. And if you want to, I know many folks are interested in getting those Amazon titles. So this really sets you up to see when Amazon titles are live and available for purchase. If you want to get in touch with us about anything I've covered today, feel free to email us at ebooks@dp.la. And we have a website called ebooks.dp.la where you can find more information. So, and lastly, I'll say we have some really exciting news coming out next week. So stay tuned, more to come. And now I will turn it over to Shaneé.
Thanks, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shaneé Yvette Murrain, and I build inclusive collections and promote them as part of our shared culture with the 4,000 plus libraries, museums, and archives around the country that represent the DPLA community, and we design technology to make these resources fully available. This afternoon, I'm going to talk a bit about some of the recent work we've done to dismantle racism in our work to build collections that reflect our shared cultural heritage. Next slide. The Black Women's Suffrage Digital Collection, which you all might have heard about us working on over the course of the last year, is really an effort for us to cultivate sub-grant partnerships that acknowledge that our digital endeavors as a field, including DPLA, are not divorced from questions of race, power, and equity. The relationships and collection development priorities that we cultivated as a part of our sub-granting partnerships for this project are grounded in inclusivity and consciousness of the history of injustice in libraries and archives. And with Black women's suffrage, our collaboration to surface records documenting Black women in the women's suffrage movement is DPLA making an intentional effort to make African-American collections accessible, and also modeling how our national network and platform can serve as a place for repair and modeling how to build reciprocal relationships. We stewarded partnerships with the Atlanta University Center, Robert W. Woodruff Library, the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture in Charleston, South Carolina, Tuskegee University, the Amistad Research Center at Tulane University, and the Southern California Library, all to collaborate on this national digital collection that highlights the roles and experiences of Black women in the women's suffrage movement, as well as extending the timeline to include Black women's total history of activism. And this was created and part of the centennial celebration of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which was last year. DPLA also subgranted funds from Pivotal Ventures, a Melinda Gates company, to support the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library's Engage 2020 Look Back, Move Forward campaign. Engage 2020 was a public library engagement as expanding on this notion of DPLA being in place. And this was a wide variety of programming that was targeted to diverse groups and facilitated conversations around important civic issues about the history of voting in the US, past and current campaign trends, the US Census, Black Lives Matter, and the racial uprisings of last summer. Also taking all of these punctuations in history and spotlighting the history of women's voting rights and Black women as frontline workers. The timeline that we found ourselves in was just it also paralleled some of the work that these Black women suffragists did. So it was wonderful to be able to support that kind of community engagement in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg community. The subgrants were also used to digitize artifacts and create metadata related to the history of Black women in the suffrage movement to make these collections more widely accessible. I think I should have said next slide quite a while ago. Next slide. Now you all can see all the partnerships that I've been referring to, and a slide for our launch event, Race, Gender, and Politics and History. We're really proud of public programs that we did like these over the pandemic that were designed for the DPLA community and centered our subgrant partners' expertise as subject specialists, librarians talking about the kind of curatorial choices and use cases for the collections, and really positioning our colleagues and peers as thought leaders in these series of online conversations throughout the pandemic. Next slide, please. We've also been, building, as part of these building reciprocal relationships, recognizing that the legacies of white supremacy and racism and institutions that make up our field and the DPLA network have resulted in the failure to develop collections that are truly representative in the public we serve. So we, the DPLA Network Council, began drafting a document to guide the creation of more inclusive and diverse collections as a part of their 2020-19 priorities. And some of the work that was pulled out of the Black Women's Suffrage collection continues to inform that. The idea statement, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Access, and Social Justice, was approved in July, and this statement unified the membership around a clear expression of intent to actively work on closing the content deficits and identify how and should a digital public library respond, and held our feet to the fire about what we'll do. And the past 2 years, we've seen a lot of statements come out, and our world and life have been punctuated by events that demand that we reckon with our past and move beyond statements. These times have really required that we be clear about who we say we are and accountable for what we say we'll do. So as a part of these statements, the DPLA network is building our futures and moving beyond statements to clear actions. We've taken actions in 3 areas with people, practice, and programming. We're building diverse networks like we've seen with the partnerships in the Black Women's Suffrage collection. We're focusing on coalitions and institutional collaborations. And we're also evaluating our practices and how we invest in internal and external training, as well as how we build tools that enable a more robust and diverse national programming landscape, and how we design our programming with partners to ensure that underrepresented identities and communities are included, particularly as it relates to creating solutions for digital access. The DPLA's Metadata Working Group began drafting a statement on potentially harmful language in August 2020 based on the Black Women's Suffrage collection, and focused on content that might appear in the portal, including depictions of racism and misogyny. This was an effort of care for how users and visitors to the site might encounter materials that could be alarming or harmful. And more than a trigger warning, it is an ethic of care that also explains how libraries do work and how decisions are made, and also it opens a dialogue between ourselves and site visitors and gives them a pathway to report materials that are offensive and shouldn't be included in the collection. Both these statements the one for the Black Women's Suffrage collection and the larger DPLA collection now have been approved by the network, and we've seen them reused and expanded upon by institutions throughout our hub network. They can be read and adopted. You'll see at the bottom of the link for both of those on the slides that we're encouraging that these be reused. Next slide, please. On May 12th, we had our network gathering embodying the theme, Ideas Building Inclusion in a Digital Age. And our hub network spoke about updates and had really deep dialogue about the network's ideas work. We saw and heard how the last year transformed how we all build community and enrich partnerships. And it was also a time where we owned the problems in terms of, being able to take a bird's eye view of the historical homogeneity of our collections and how, as a collaborative national digital library, we could do something about that. It was us taking an active stance towards the future, and we intend to continue to leverage DPLA's strategic position and platform and support for expanding on DEI work in the field. And that is where we are going with DPLA strategy into 2022. Next slide, please. So continue this conversation with us. Check out the Black Women's Suffrage site, follow our socials, and sign up for the DPLA newsletter, where we'll be sharing future iterations on this work and how we are planning to expand on increasing access in our ebooks work, and also in our quest to build intentional, inclusive, representative, and responsive digital collections. I think we now are opening up to questions. Is that correct?
Before we do, I just want to wrap up. I'll do my best to sort of summarize or to kind of wrap what you just heard from my colleagues, and connect it back to what Shaneé just alluded to, which is sort of as we think about, our new fiscal year, which starts next week, and how we really lean in and take advantage of this moment. And I think, as I talk to a lot of you out there, part of the challenge of the moment is how do we balance the urgency that we feel, those of us that are focused on bridging the chasms of ensuring equity and of fighting repressive legacies, with the realism of what it means, for where we're starting from, who we are, and what we can do with so many hours in the day. I just wanted to sort of, for those of you that came in throughout too, just want to highlight just a couple of things or try to connect some threads. I mean, one is, it really is because of the work that the staff has done in putting ourselves in conversation with and listening mode with our library partners that we've been able to make the progress we've made around the flexible licensing and flexible curation models that Michele shared at the outset. And I think part of the success and momentum that those projects that we're putting together are part of is a larger sets of conversations happening from activists and policymakers and a whole bunch of other folks out in the field who are pushing hard in their ways to make sure that access expands and to make sure that libraries and the digital rights and the digital presence of libraries remain robust to ensure that their patrons are served. Second, so much of the momentum that Shaneé shared and is largely responsible for is driven by and is driving reflections for us on how we think about organizing the work. For the last several years since we've started, we've really been focused on we launched with a state-by-state approach and strategy of building partnerships. I think for a variety of reasons, we're now thinking and acting in different ways. So for instance, what does it mean to organize, as Shaneé is sharing with the example of the Black women's suffrage, collections outside of this sort of state-by-state hub structure we've created. We've seen momentum this year in multiple state regional collaborations coming together as hub entities, most recently with in the Pacific Northwest. And we're going to do more of that. And we're going to be more, as we're trying to be more intentional and responsive and building responsive collections, how do we partner not just with at a large state level, but how do we partner with community-based organizations? One entity that we've been inspired to work with and we're looking to work with more is with public libraries. And Shaneé shared Charlotte Mecklenburg Library and the work they did over the last year that we were able to partner with, and that's been an inspiration. The last bit I'll just share, in part, this is a plug for something we're doing next week. And if you're out there and you have the link, you could maybe throw it into the chat. But part of the realization of the last year is an extra urgency on what it means, what the lack of access to broadband means for so many millions of Americans. And as we're focused on helping to ensure quality digital content, we're increasingly aware and putting ourselves in solidarity with folks who are doing the work to ensure access when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to job development, when it comes to education materials. And we feel like there's a unique moment to seize a level of realization and federal investment to drive forward libraries' role in ensuring broadband access. So on Monday afternoon, we're hosting with Knight Foundation a conversation about that very topic, the role libraries can play in ensuring equitable access to broadband. There's the link. You'll see some, we'll be telling stories from libraries across the country about how they're seizing the moment. And we'll be talking from a much higher level with Crosby Kempfer, from the head of IMLS, among others, and be closed off by Tracy Hall from ALA, sort of helping to share out what we learn and think about what comes next. So I mentioned that as part of a pragmatic yet also an achievable but heavy mountain or steep mountain that we're hoping to climb, that so many people, so many of us have been working on for decades in some cases, and we feel like we've got a unique moment to really, an obligation to take that on. So with that, I will stop, and I don't know how we're handling questions, but we're happy to do that.
I think we're opening questions in the chat. So if there are any questions, please put them in the chat and we will answer them.
If we don't have questions, maybe we can be impertinent and ask folks that want to share it either by raising their hand or in the chat. What are you thinking about differently in the course of what you learned over the last year? I know from gauging and talking to different folks, we're not the only ones exploring that, and really trying to digest the lessons that and realize an extra sense of realization of what we're up against in terms of inequities in our field from the last year. Oh, there's a question.
So it looks like the question is about whether or not we work with historical society collections. So Shaneé, maybe you can take that.
Yes, we do. Thank you for that question. There are a number of historical societies that contribute to DPLA up through state hubs. And one of the projects that we're working on and planning to collaborate with hubs directly on is supporting some of the smaller place-based institutions and historical societies with digital capacity building, providing them with support for digitization or support with planning, including financial support for seeking additional sub-grants and putting together things like annual funds, and also providing them with an opportunity to, contribute to DPLA's governance through our network council and advisory council, and also bring their unique perspectives into the work. So we'd like to collaborate more directly with historical societies over the year, because we've seen that many of them an intentional collecting around COVID-19 in their communities' specific experiences. So we'd like to see those things included into our work over the next year.
Okay, it looks like we have another question from Amberly, who's with a nonprofit organization called the Permanent Legacy Foundation that creates archives collections for families and organizations. And she's curious about what notable partnerships we have outside of libraries. I'd say that's a Shaneé question, or maybe a John question.
We can both do it. I mean, I'll say, some of what you heard today, I think one of the privileges we have is to be able to reach across library and GLAM field and touch on related institutions. So Michael shared about the work we've been doing with the Wikipedia community writ large through Wikimedia Commons. That's one example. I think, the work that Michele walked through involves collaboration with a variety of entities. Libraries are core and the sort of core element of that, but we're also working with publishers and other creative folks creating creative content and knowledge. And, a big part of our work is interfacing with and building technology and tools, and especially with folks who kind of do that from a civic minded perspective. And then I think, in terms of the work, the archival work that Shaneé's been working on, I'll let you cite examples of some of the types of institutions above and beyond libraries we're working with.
Beyond libraries, we are, as part of our work to intentionally support some of the smaller institutions, we are working, I'll give an example, with our Recollection Wisconsin hub on a partnership that would directly support a local women's art museum. So we're expanding on, we're traditionally working with libraries because they have had the technical capacity and financial support to build up DPLA hubs. But as part of our digital capacity building and support for small institutions, we're looking for more direct one-on-one partnerships with smaller house museums and community archives and collectives that are outside of our traditional, notion of public libraries and academic libraries. So we're expanding on that.
And just to build off of that, I think I've certainly, and as we've talked about it as a team, we've been inspired by the activism and social movements that particularly received a lot of attention over the last year, both in terms of racial justice, but also in terms of folks trying to fight for larger economic questions, issues. And so, we're also trying to figure out how we can do a better job of working with and uplifting the work of artists and musicians and other folks who sort of, and creators and authors who inspire our work, who also are unequally able to sort of benefit from the full promise of this digital future we're living in.
All right, Michael, I think this one's for you. Debbie has a question. Her library has an ongoing digitization project in which they are using Past Perfect to catalog. And she's curious if we have any recommendations for systems that would be simpler to use.
I'm actually going to have to claim ignorance here. I think, technologically speaking, we are an aggregator and don't really do too much cataloging of our own. The things that jump to mind for me are things like Omeka and Recurtu, but I really can't say that they're going to necessarily serve your needs. Yeah, I guess that's the short version. But I think, the great thing about, this community, ALA, and the library community writ large is, I think I'm going to just ask the audience here, what do you suggest? Because there's plenty of people here that know more than I do. So if you have an answer, please add it to the chat.
And we already have an answer coming in. I think there was one more. If we have any plans to collect first-person stories around COVID. Shaneé, could you speak to that?
Sure, that's a great question. We are, as a part of the Black Women's Suffrage Project, we are consistently revisiting our big query, which pulls from the aggregation relevant results into the collection. And we've gone back and added COVID-19 to ensure that collections related to this movement pull in. But you all might have seen, and we can throw a link in the chat, that we have invited Internet Archives Community Webs into partnership with DPLA. And this will include metadata from over 700 publicly available community webs archives into the DPLA. And the Community Webs program documents and supports over 100 public libraries who collaborate with their local organizations, movements, and groups to document the lives of their local citizens. And they had a COVID-19 collection, which includes 30 collections that document local responses to the pandemic, from New Orleans to New York City. And these are focusing primarily on African-American diasporan experiences of COVID-19. And these collections point out racial disparities in health outcomes and access. So we're really, proud and excited that we'll be able to have those local experiences as a part of the DPLA, the Black Women's Suffrage Portal, and also our larger collection.
Great, it looks like we've come to the end of the questions. Oh. John, do you want to wrap it up?
Well, I so appreciate everyone coming and joining us today. And I'm really proud that you've gotten to hear from this fabulous team that we've put together. Everything, as you've heard, that we do also involves collaborations and partnerships with others. So if you are interested in being part of it, or you have suggestions like the Chicago Cultural Alliance, which I saw mentioned in the comments, of which I'm a huge fan, please let us know, and please let them know about us, and that we're here to be a resource to help ensure that folks the work that both long-term institutions and more recent ones and movements are taking on. We're here to be a support and an asset and a platform and an ally, and help make sure that the work being done is accessible to all. So I really appreciate you being here, and I really appreciate my colleagues for all that they're doing and contributing to this work, because they've, especially during this last year and a half, they've really been working hard, as I know so many of you have as well. So thank you for joining us today.